So welcome back, guys. I'm really excited to close out the afternoon with you guys. If you're standing in the back, there's plenty of space up in the front. Come on in. Don't be shy. This is your last opportunity to hang out with all of the wonderful people that are at the conference today. We're in the home stretch here. We're going to close this out strong. And to start off closing it out, we all want to know who won these gift cards, right? We're excited? Yeah? Okay. All right. So again, we had two different contests that were happening. We had one for filling out the delegate survey, and we have one for not necessarily the person who got the most scans, but they did a random call for who got the scan, hit all the booths in the other room. So without further ado, our winner for the survey, Jessica Leggett. Jessica, are you in the room? Jessica! Hey, everybody give Jessica a round of applause. Come up here, I'm going to give you a high five, but I'm going to tell you that they're going to email you your gift card, okay? All right, sweet, thank you. I saw her getting up, so I didn't want to be like, no, don't get up. Like, she was bringing the energy. Okay, so good job on getting the survey turned in. That's awesome. Okay, and then our booth scan winner, drum roll. Let's get drum roll going, okay. Lester Lashley. Is Lester in here? And he's not in here. Lester, are we in the room? No, that's okay. Well, we did the drum roll and he's not here. He's probably coming back from lunch. Lester, that's okay. We will email you your gift card. Guys, this is fun and in a great way to get you guys engaged. So when you guys come next year, beyond the ball, because you can win a $250 gift card too. So we're going to keep things rolling right along. I'm really excited about this new session because as a podcaster myself, I find this to be very, very intriguing to learn about how we can use podcasts as an effective marketing tool. And I'm really excited to welcome to the stage Lara Coleman. Let's give her a round of applause.
Hi, everyone. Let's hear it for Lester one more time. I'm just kidding. My name is Lara Coleman. I'm the Executive Director of Advertising and Content Marketing at FS Investments. We are an asset management firm located in Philadelphia. Thank you for being here. It's Friday. It's after lunch. Maybe we're feeling a little sluggish, but hopefully you're here because you're interested in learning how to launch a podcast. Maybe you've already launched one and you're here to learn something new. Maybe you have no interest in podcasts, in which case the door is right there, but also I think there's something really valuable about incorporating audio into your marketing strategies, even if it's a small audio player on your website to make content a little bit more accessible for people who prefer to listen. We'll get into all of that. We're going to talk about how to overcome the most common technical and business challenges, navigate any budget, define success measures. Whenever I talk about launching a podcast with people, what they always want to know is, which microphone do I need? I will answer that, I promise. But first, we're going to travel back in time a little bit. The year is 2014. I'm in my first job out of college. I'm part of a 4-person marketing team. It's kind of like a mom and pop situation. I'll describe it as wholesome. I'm living on a llama and alpaca farm, and so I'm driving to work, like past all these farmlands. It sounds like I'm in the middle of nowhere, but I'm actually in central New Jersey, and it's kind of bleak. And then in 2014, something happens. I discover my first podcast. Show of hands, who here was along for Serial Season 1? Okay, great. Okay, we're all friends. We get it. If you haven't listened, go home, Season 1 only. I will not vouch for Season 2 or Season 3. Don't Google anything. A lot's happened. But in 2014, this was it. And I remember it was the first time I was like excited to get in my car and go to work because I had a new episode to listen to. And then I was so excited to get to work and talk to people over coffee and be like, who do you think did it? It was just this revitalization of audio. Obviously, talk shows and radio has been around for a long time, but this was really instrumental in reigniting the space. So flash forward a year or two later, I'm like, I need to get out of this like farmland. I want to get back to the city. I want to get back to Philadelphia. I'm looking for new jobs. I decide to niche in on digital marketing. And I went to school for graphic design, so everything I'm learning is just kind of on the fly. And I start listening to podcasts about digital marketing. I'm searching SEO, I'm searching email, anything that makes sense, and I'm just putting the episodes on while I'm driving to my interviews to try and absorb some of that information. Long story short, I did get the job. We'll flash forward to 2020. I've been there for about 5 years, and I start to hear rumblings that people might want to start a podcast there. My love for podcasts never went away. I actually started one with a friend as kind of a hobby. So I kept dabbling, and I raised my hand and I was like, I will make this happen. I don't know anything about launching a podcast in the financial services space, but like, I'm pretty sure I can make it happen. How hard can it be? We wanted to solve a couple of problems. One, we all know that our clients, our advisors, our audience are inundated with email. I know that's all I hear from our stakeholders, from salespeople that are out in the field, is like they're not even looking at their inbox. So we wanted to find a new way to reach them that was more creative. And obviously, if you are subscribed to podcasts, you know that like it's great because they go right to your phone. You can just click and the episode is right there. And then our content creators, our research team also wanted a way to get their insights out there really quickly. So the way that our process with content was working was the content creators would write a blog, a white paper, report, whatever it is, that's gonna go through proofing, that's gonna go through design, that's gonna go through compliance, that's gonna go through other stakeholders, other eyeballs. And like, you know, we only have so much speed to market there. What we wanted the podcast to allow us to do was for them to be able to sit down, record their thoughts, and have us put it out the next day, in the ideal world. Like, sometimes it's a couple days later. So first up, we wanted to create a working team. So that was me, somebody from our design team, and then somebody from that research team who's creating the content. And when we launched the podcast, we had two main focuses: the branding and getting compliance approval. Who thinks branding was harder? Literally nobody. Who thinks compliance was harder? Oh my gosh, you're right, it was. So I'm gonna talk about those two things as the main business challenges. To come up with the branding, we did a huge brainstorm. We had about 100 names out there. We narrowed it down to 3. We had FS Insights, Fireside, Beyond the Markets. We created this evaluation sheet that by no means is the gold standard, but we sent this around to all the stakeholders that had been in those brainstorm meetings and asked questions like, is the name memorable? Does it look good written out? Is it easy to say? Is it easy to pronounce? And we landed on Fireside. And then we had these 3 different creative directions. The first one is kind of a pretty straightforward approach. The second one is a little bit of a play on like charts and fire, and then the second one is a flame coming out of a microphone. We landed on the first one. It's a little bit safer. This is where we ended up. And then the other thing about podcasts, and this is definitely a business challenge that you'll run into if you've never done one before, is everybody has an opinion. People who've never opined on marketing in their life will be like, here's what I think, because it's flashy, right? It's something that's very public facing, it's out there. At the last minute, we did have one person who requested a small change. I don't know if you can see it. We capitalized the S in Fireside to be a play on FS Investments, kind of a happy accident there, but I like to point that out is a lot of the challenges that I'm talking about, you're never gonna have the exact same ones, but it's all these small things that you'll never think of, and I think that everybody wanting to opine on the podcast will probably be a universal truth. Okay, this brings me to the really juicy stuff, compliance. We have an amazing compliance team. They make sure that we're following all of the regulatory rules. As we were launching the podcast, they had 2 main concerns: archiving reviews and disclosures. So if you listen to a podcast, then you know that at the top of every episode, the host is begging you to leave a review. They're like, please leave us a review. We'll say your name on air. People don't leave reviews a lot, but our compliance team was convinced that we would be like inundated with all of these reviews, and how would we ever archive them? So that was problem number 1. And then problem number 2 was disclosures. So when it came to archiving reviews, they wanted to make sure we had a system to record keep all of those reviews. And my suggestion was, well, we'll just do it manually, it's fine. And they're like, no, we don't know. I actually went through every single financial services podcast that I could find and looked at how many reviews they had, what period of time were they over. And 9 times out of 10, people had like 2 or 5 reviews. And as I was doing this competitive research, I stumbled on this really juicy show, FINRA Unscripted. And I was like, look, if it's okay with FINRA herself, surely we can do this. So that was good. What we ended up settling on was that I will check our platforms every week, every day, whatever you want. And if there's a review, I will take a screenshot and I will email it to you, and then you will record keep it. That was fine. It sounds insane, but that was the process. The second item that we wanted to make sure we were being compliant with was our disclosure. This is it. And so initially, I had suggested, okay, in the show notes, so on that right-hand side there, in the description under the headline, can we just put it there? And like, no, we need it to be front and center on the main page. Don't love it, but we have to make creative compromises, and this is one place that I was like, all right, this is not the hill I'll die on. You can have your disclosure. It's there. Would it be nice to say what our podcast is about? Absolutely, but this is good too. Okay, so I'm gonna get into the technical parts of this next, and this is how I'll transition there, is when we wanted to launch the podcast, one of the things that we wanted to try and do, especially to sell it to stakeholders, was to keep this cost effective. So I had identified a free hosting platform that we could use. At the time it was called Anchor, now they were bought by Spotify, and it's now called Spotify for Podcasters. When I actually went to go launch the show, like our episodes were ready, we were compliance approved, we had the branding, we had our archival process in place, I realized that that hosting platform didn't allow me to customize that description field for the show in a way where it would show up to every platform. So we had to quickly pivot, identify another hosting platform, which we use Buzzsprout, that would allow us to do that. We made it work, it was fine. So now I'm gonna get into tools and tech at any budget. You could spend $0 launching a podcast. You could spend tens of thousands of dollars launching a podcast. Obviously, the cheapest way to do it would be to just like talk into your phone, upload it to a free hosting platform. We're gonna talk about software considerations, and then hardware. That's when I'm gonna answer, what microphone do I need? So you'll need to host your podcast somewhere. I mentioned we use Buzzsprout. If you Google it, there's so many options. Buzzsprout will probably run you about like $12 a month. I'm not like paid by any of these companies, but this is just like what we use at FS. And then sometimes it'll depend how much audio you're uploading to, right? Like it'll be $12 a month if you have 5 hours. We have never hit our threshold. It's usually not a problem. Most shows will run about 30 minutes. If you're into that next tier, I don't know, maybe it's $24. So you'll need your hosting platform, and something to look for there is a platform that's going to connect you to all of the networks. So what's nice about Buzzsprout is you upload your audio and it automatically connects to Apple, Spotify, any other, when people say like, or anywhere you listen to podcasts, it does anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also check like if there's ones you don't want to be on, you can do that too. So that's really nice. You can also, make sure that you're finding new ones when they come out. So we had launched in 2020, and I think like the year following, Amazon came out with the ability to host podcasts, which is fun because you can say like, Alexa, play Fireside. So you'll also need a recording platform to do this if you're going to be virtual. If you're in person, if you have everybody in a room, this gets blown up. We'll talk about that next. But the recording platform that we use is a tool called Riverside. And so this is how you would do it if you want to spend $0. You could do Skype. You could just jump on a video call and record it. If you have one person who just wants to talk, which is fine, you could literally open the microphone on your phone and record that for free. Skype will also be free, and then you could upload to Spotify for Podcasters and still be at like that $0 mark. If you want to spend a little bit of money, and I already talked about Buzzsprout, Riverside is a really great platform, and the difference between Skype and something like Riverside, which it does have competitors, is if you have 2 or 3 people doing a podcast, it'll have its own individual audio channel for every speaker. So if you're in Spotify, or if you're using something like Skype, that's free. That's just one audio channel. So if somebody coughs, you have to cut that entire section and then like figure it out. If you're using a tool like Riverside, you can just cut that one person and the rest of the conversation can keep on going. I also have on here in the middle a tool called Adobe Audition. So that is if you're in person and you want to record directly to there, you can do that too. That works really well. Transcripts are also a really important part of the podcast process. Again, really juicy stuff here. But one, it helps you to edit, it helps you to put it through the review process, and it also makes it more accessible to people who maybe cannot listen to the podcast. So I have 2 tools on here again, kind of different price points. Rev, you pay per minute, so it can be pretty cost effective. And they have a lot of tools that'll take out the ums, the likes, anything you want like that. It utilizes a lot of AI functionality to do that. And then you have a tool like Descript that will allow you to edit in your transcript and also edit the audio. Descript also has a really cool feature that I want to touch on, as I'm sure like in a lot of the sessions we've all been in, we're all talking about AI and digital marketing. They have a tool where you can clone the host's voices, which sounds a little creepy, but it's not. The thing that we use it for, and why I think it's so important in the financial services space, is we have one show that we do. It's called The Market Minute. It's about the markets. And we do that every Friday afternoon before close. So often the host will say something like 4.2%, and then market will close and it's 4.1%. Instead of having to call that person back in, we can just use that cloned version of their voice and update it really easily. We're not doing entire shows with robots or anything yet. So these are some of the options. Again, it's not exhaustive. You can Google. These are the ones that we use. If you forget, you can also just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. That's software. Hardware considerations. You probably know you need a microphone. We'll talk about that. That's if you're in person or if you're virtual. And when I say need, that's a best practice. Again, like you can also, if you want to spend $0, you just want that proof of concept to show people, hey, we can do this. We have something to say. You could record right into your laptop. You could record right into your phone. Headphones are very helpful in eliminating background noise. If you're going to be in person, you will need a podcast board. I'll do my best to explain what that is. And then microphone arm stands. If you have like 4 people in a room, can be really helpful in removing some of the clutter. Cables to hook everything up, a designated laptop. As I'm talking through these hardware considerations, you may be like, she doesn't seem like a technical expert. You would be right. And this is kind of a fun story that doesn't really fit in anywhere in the presentation, so I'll share it now. When we're launching the podcast, one of the other huge business challenges is, especially if you're having guests from other firms come on, is like the firewalls of it all. Every different firm blocks different sites. So ours at the time blocked Apple Podcasts, and we're like, that's pretty important. We're gonna need you to unblock that. When I put in the ticket to our IT team, the person who answered it was like, hey, by the way, I majored in audio engineering in college. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Put that in my back pocket. We had kind of like a bootstrap team that was doing this, and then that person who was running it, the technical side of it, ended up leaving, and I was like, I could do this, but probably like everybody in the room, everybody else was like, I don't know, we maybe need somebody else. So we ended up bringing that person on full time, which is a really fun full circle story that it was literally just a coincidence that he answered that help desk ticket that we found out that he had expertise in this space. So he handles all of this. I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to set up the podcast board. Talking specifics, the microphones that we use are Shure microphones, the MV7. Again, when we talk about different budgets, you can get a microphone for as little as $20, $30. This one, I believe, costs around $200. You could easily spend double that. We also like to recommend, and this is what we use, is this B&H has this really nice starter pack that comes with that podcast board. Again, this is just if you're in person. If you're virtual, you don't need that. It comes with the arm stands, the cables, the headphones, everything you'll need, an SD card. That's all in there too. So other tips, like I said, talk to your IT team. Maybe you're not gonna have that exact lightning in a bottle situation that we did, but you might have somebody who knows a little bit more than you do on that technical side. Speaking of that, it can be helpful to have that person or producer join your podcast session to help with technology, because you really don't want your hosts, or if you're doing it yourself, fumbling with connecting cables, getting their headphones set up, while also trying to steer the conversation. And then double check your recording and record it in more than one place. We've learned this lesson the hard way. Going back to some of these tools, we record it in an SD card in this podcast board, and then also record it directly to a laptop so that if something goes wrong, we have it somewhere else too. And then how do you measure success? Okay, you've done all this stuff. You have your branding. You have compliance approval. You have all of the hardware you need, and your podcast is out there. What do you look at? Obviously, there's popular metrics that we all know about, but what I really love to talk about is unexpected results that you might find from your podcast, especially in the financial services space. Those popular metrics, though. Obviously, episode downloads will be important, and you really want to look at those first 7 days. Your rating, who doesn't love saying we have a 5-star podcast? Your subscriber count, when we launched our show back in 2020, Apple Podcasts did not tell you how many subscribers you had. And it was all kind of a guessing game based on episode downloads. They now do, which is great. You have that metric that you can bring into your reporting. You can also look at episode completion. How long are people listening? Are they dropping off at 25%? If your podcast is 30 minutes long, are they just sticking for the first 5 minutes? Are they getting to the very end? Obviously, we found that the shorter the show, the longer they'll listen. Again, 30 minutes is really around that sweet spot. We find if we tend to go longer than that, people can drop off. But again, I love talking about the unexpected results. So when we launched the podcast, like I mentioned, we wanted a way to reach financial advisors. But what we found was that it was a lot of our internal people who were listening and getting something out of this. So we would hear from wholesalers, our salespeople in the field, that they were putting this podcast on their way to client meetings so that they would have talking points in mind. We have one show that's about our value add program, so anything like health and wellness to different ways that you can work with your team, and we have episodes for each of those offerings, and people would listen to those and then go into a client meeting, and they would be able to speak about that knowledgeably. So using this as an internal tool can also be really valuable. If you can't get your compliance team comfortable, something external facing, again, audio can still be a really powerful way to reach even your internal audience. People who aren't gonna read the emails, people who are not gonna read the printouts. Salespeople drive a lot. Put it on in your car. Obviously, it's a great brand awareness play, and it's a great way to use it to generate new content. So taking that podcast and turning it into a blog post, turning it into a social clip. We've started integrating video now, so we'll also have video shorts based on our podcast. And then also external networking. I mentioned that the guest approval component can be challenging, but once you get it, it's so helpful in getting your show out there, making those relationships. We have another series called Head to Head, where our co-heads of distribution have other financial advisors on the podcast. And they're great conversations, but it's also a really good opportunity to have a meeting with somebody that you may not otherwise have been able to meet with. I think that's it for me, and I'm happy to take any questions. Does anyone need that microphone repeated again? Okay, he'll bring you a microphone.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned downloads as a metric. To your knowledge, is there any way to track the number of plays that a particular episode gets? Because that's our problem in measuring the popularity of our podcast.
It's tricky, right? And every platform tracks it a little bit differently. And are you looking at your hosting platform for those, or are you going into
Yes.
Apple?
We use Libsyn.
Okay, so sometimes if you go into Apple and Spotify directly, if you log into those, they'll break it down a little bit more. It's tricky.
Thank you.
And I think sometimes, again, going back to that, look at the 7-day number. If we put a new episode out at 6 a.m. and we look at 7 a.m., we'll see the number of downloads, and that's probably the subscribers. And so that's probably like the automatic downloads. And if you check it again in a day or so, and that number increases, you're like, okay, these are probably people who they've gotten our email about it, they've gotten a social media post, and they've actually gone in and clicked play. It's like not a science, but it gets you a little closer.
It's just frustrating because I'm a huge podcast person. I listen to like 5 different podcasts a week, but I don't download any of them.
It's so frustrating. Then even more frustrating is when your head of sales or whoever is the stakeholder comes and says like, okay, but can you tell me who is listening? I'm like, that I cannot do. The hosting platform we do does break it down by city. So if we have a guest on and we know where they're from, we can usually say like, well, we had somebody on from, I'm making this up, Austin, Texas, and we're seeing numbers spike in that city, I'm guessing most people from their firm have listened to this episode. Again, it's not a science, but it can get you a little bit closer. I think that black box is changing, and like I mentioned, when we launched in 2020, Apple didn't even tell you the subscriber count, so I could see a lot of that changing over time, too.
Hi, this is Sophia from JP Morgan. Since you mentioned compliance, I wonder what your approvals process is like for podcasts, because one of the problems you were trying to solve was getting content out quickly.
Yeah.
By the time you shoot it, edit
Yeah.
it, I'm sure like legal or compliance stuff to review, and you mentioned some of it was like market commentary. Is it a same day thing? What's
So-
your like timeline like?
Yeah, it depends. The market commentary episodes that we do are less than 5 minutes. So that's how we do that. He can listen to it in 5 minutes. For a really timely episode where there's been like a world event with a huge market impact, we will have our compliance person sit in the room while they record the podcast. And then obviously we're still putting it through the systems. They're still checking the transcript, but they've literally been in there and heard everything. For other shows, it's more of your standard process where it's like about a week and they have the transcript, they have the audio. I know I have asked, he listens to it on, you can toggle like 1.5 speed, so he'll listen to it on a faster speed to also, like any few seconds helps.
Thank you. I'm Ashley Miller with Clear Street, and I have a question for you around content.
Okay.
In this industry, it can get a little stagnant with some of the topics where you are repeating yourself or, other than like even a daily market update, right? It's still basically the same content. It's just what happened in the market today. So I'm curious how you strategize your programming to keep it fresh and relevant and have people still coming back and getting new value instead of the same story over
Yeah.
and over, just said slightly differently.
No, you're exactly right. When we started out, we had one main like flagship series, which was Fireside, and that was more of the deep dives into specific asset classes and different sectors. So we'd have our real estate expert come on and talk about opportunity in commercial real estate, or we would have our economist come on and talk about, 5 trends to look out for in the next quarter. And then we started bringing in those guest interviews. And when we talk about how to, this maybe is my session for next year, but how to grow a podcast, it's really those outside guest perspectives where you can see your audience expanding. So I would say that's when, in terms of the market commentary, you're totally right. It is all the same. We actually took that show, and that was the first one that we separated out from our main show, because we were finding, right, like that has a listener base, but the people who want just the other, like, more unique offerings, we were starting to see a bit of a drop off. So we separated that out. The people who want it, they can get that there. But in terms of the other content, that's on its own. So yeah, I think guest is probably the biggest suggestion to keep it fresh.
Hi, this is Ryan from Harding Loebner, asset manager in New Jersey. A question about the manpower involved. You mentioned like some of the players,
Yeah.
but I'm curious, one, if you script it, and if you don't, what is the process from ideation? How long does it take once you come up with that to either script it or not, but then record, edit, and then actually get it out there? Because if
Yeah.
it's like 30 minutes, I
That's a
imagine
good-
that takes a while.
That's a good question, and it varies based on show to show. So the one show that we have, Fireside, which our research team helms, they talk about this stuff all day. We can put them in a room and press record, and they're good. They don't need, they do some prep work on their own. Like we'll say, hey, you guys are scheduled to record on Friday. What do you want to talk about? And they'll have an outline, but they're pros. They could do this all day, so they don't need a lot of work from us. We have another host who has his own show, and his podcasts are based on strategy notes that he writes. So we'll have somebody on our side who is in content marketing actually go through that note and generate questions based on that note and kind of tee him up. So there is some prep work. When we have outside guests, that's a lot of research, a lot of creating the interview questions, then sending them to the guests to get approval. And then in terms of manpower, so we'll usually have whoever's doing the podcast, if that's our research team as an example, we'll have 2 or 3 people in the room. Our audio engineer, if we're doing video, we'll have our video producer in there. And then sometimes we'll have, the show coordinator, show producer, either myself or somebody else in the room too. Just kind of get like, oh, this was a soundbite people reacted to. Oh, we need to cut that part out. No time for any more questions, but again, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email. I love to talk about this stuff, and send me the podcasts that you all launch. I would love to listen to them.